We are very honored to have Cinda and Linea Johnson here with us this afternoon as they share their story about a family's battle with mental illness and how they break through the stigma of what it means. And they have resources to share with us as well as their story of hope. So let's welcome Cinda and Linea Johnson.
She stole my chair. Try and save it for myself. Thank you for having us. We're really happy to be here. We've been traveling a lot lately, and it's really nice to. I just came from Boston. She just came from Hawaii, and it's nice to visit different communities around the country. So visiting the Midwest is a treat to be able to see you all. So thanks for having us. We're just going to start out with some statistics and facts, and then we're going to share our story a little bit, and we'll take a break and have some questions, and then we'll go into kind of what's happening now, some thoughts on mental health advocacy and empowerment, and then we'll go over resources and have more questions at the end.
So if you have questions, jot them down on your index cards so that you don't lose your thoughts, okay?
And we'll have those index cards collected before each of the questions.
Hi, I'm Cinda, the mother. I know you probably couldn't tell. It was daughter, but I'm a professor in special education and the director of our graduate program at Seattle University. And I teach classes to school psychologists to be, school counselors to be, special educators. I'm teaching a class right now this quarter on youth and children with emotional behavior disorders. So I'm like the expert, right? So 1 in 4 families have someone with a serious mental illness. I know that. I talk about it. 1 in 5 young people has a mental health condition of some type. And 1 in 8 adolescents has depression. 1 in 8 adolescents. I had no idea, even though I know these statistics, that it would affect my own family as much as it has and so deeply. So when I say I'm the expert, even though, quote, the expert doesn't know this world very well, when you step into it as a family member, it's really, really hard. And I think that we will be sharing both the professional resources and all that stuff, but mostly we'll be talking to you from our hearts about the story and the experiences that we've had.
This is a statistic I find really scary and shocking, is that suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death among people 15 to 24. I think it's actually the 3rd leading cause of death for people younger than 15 as well. So in knowing this, I never thought that I would be part of the statistics of people struggling with suicidal ideation, but I did come to know that struggle very well, so we'll share that with you as well.
Of all those students, we're going to share with Active Minds that 1 in 2 college students at some point in their college life has symptoms of a mental health condition severe enough that they are not able to do school. And that means things like anxiety, depression, OCD, eating disorders. That's when bipolar disorder hits. That's when a lot of mental health conditions hit. But of those students, only 30% receive treatment. So that, again, is a really shocking statistic, that these are people who really need health care early. And oftentimes, as it continues to go, the symptoms get worse. And those conditions can lead to dropping out of high school. It can lead to suicide. In Washington State, I do a research project following up all of our students in Washington State who identify as having a mental illness. And we follow them 1 year after they leave high school. And we follow 6,000 students, but that's all of them, not just the ones who identify as having a mental health condition. But of our students in Washington State, and I know this is very similar to Wisconsin, because I work with the people in Wisconsin that do the same research, 65% of our high school students who have mental health conditions drop out of high school. And that causes homelessness and arrests and not able to get or keep jobs. It's a lot of really huge impact on our society and our communities.
Now we're going to talking about our story. I come from a family of four. My dad's a rehabilitation counselor. My mom works in special ed. So I grew up thinking I knew everything about disabilities, thinking that disabilities were this normal thing that, you know, everyone would have at some point in their life as you get older, or just things that happen. And so I grew up really thinking I knew a lot about disabilities, reading the DSM, which is how you diagnose mental illnesses. And but when I began to deal with my own struggles, I thought, not me. I don't have a disability. So it was a tough story, but
Here they are. You know, you have two little girls, and they're 7.5 years apart. And my mother had depression, has depression, and there's, you know, families have got things like that. She has multiple sclerosis, so I assumed that that was probably part of her depression. But I did not think that one of my daughters would have a severe mental illness when they were little. They were raised on a small town in east central Washington on Lake Chelan. Have any of you ever heard of Lake Chelan? Well, I've heard of Wisconsin River or whatever it is now. So they had and I was in the education world, so summers were great. And like any parent in here, you don't think about your child's mental wellness as much as you think about their physical wellness when they're little.
so this is us when we're a little bit older. We had a really great childhood. I grew up in a small unincorporated village actually on Lake Chelan called Manson. And when we were in 4th grade, my mom got this wonderful opportunity that she, you know, had to go to the University of Washington for free and get her doctorate. So we moved to the Seattle area when I was in 4th grade, and the change was difficult, but I managed it well. I went from going to a middle school where it was the size of the school district that I had just come from. So it was a big change. This is me in high school at an 80s dance. And I just show this picture because I think this probably was also when I was dealing with depression, even though I was really looked happy, I was really good at covering it up. I was very much an overachiever. Well, in my life, I'm very much an overachiever. But in high school, I was even more so. I was in every club, every sport. I got really good grades. I was in, you know, every music ensemble that I could get into. Music was my passion. So I didn't drink. I didn't do drugs. I didn't go to parties, except for the one my mom told me I had to go to, because you're going to go to college and people are going to be drinking, so you should probably try a party. And I was very, very hard worker. But I would go from accomplishing a lot, or like pitching at state or doing things like that, and then I would just crash and not be able to actually function, not be able to go to practice the next day. So I would have these big ups and downs of accomplishing a lot and then not being able to leave my room when I get home after school. And I also got really good at covering it up so that I looked happy on the surface. And when I talk to my teachers now, they actually had no idea. Some of them that have read the book were shocked because they thought that I was this happy, like, well-accomplished high school student, and they had no idea that I was struggling so much. Still be. So we're going to share some parts from the book for you. We're going to read some of those. So this is something I wrote when I was a sophomore in high school. I think there's a point in everyone's life when it's hard to look up, when you feel you've fallen a million miles below the surface and can't find a way to climb back out. It's a time when everything looks dark. It hurts to smile. You try to think of everything that could help you get out and help you get back on your feet, but it's useless. You search for the things that will help you, but you know they won't really work. And in fact, you don't really want them to work. And I think this comes from a place that a lot of people feel when they have extreme depressions. The hope is gone, and you just get to the point where you can't even imagine help working, so you don't even want to try anymore. You don't even care if you get help, because you're just so tired of trying. You're so tired of just getting out of bed in the morning that nothing really matters anymore. So one of the hardest times for me in high school was when I realized that one of my best friends had started cutting. And it wasn't just, it was cutting like small cuts in the beginning. And then they started to get deeper and further down her wrist. And then she started saying things like, well, you don't have to worry about me killing yourself because you cut this way and not this way. And she started to get into detail about that. And so I knew I needed to tell someone. So I told a school teacher, and it just ended really poorly. It was mishandled, which led me into my first really extreme depression, and the first time I started to see a psychiatrist and a counselor. So this is something I wrote at that point. The pills prescribed to me after witnessing my best friend slash open her arms kept me from the pain of sadness. They also robbed me of the euphoria of joy. I was at an even keel all the time. My life was bland, while all interactions and activities suggested excitement, adventure, and pride. And going back to, for example, pitching at state. I would pitch at state and be a sophomore and would feel nothing when we got second place. I would just not feel anything. I wouldn't feel excited with the team. I would just feel blank. So at that time, as a high school student, I didn't think that there were options for me. I thought you had to take this one pill, that you could see this one psychiatrist, you could only see one counselor. I didn't know that you could have choices. So I flushed the pills down the toilet because I thought, if these make me feel horrible, then why take any medication at all? And didn't tell my mom and tried to move on from there.
All of Linea's writings in our book were in real time. She has always journaled when she was little. In fact, I find journals every once in a while that were written when she was in second or third and seventh grade. And so her writings were in the moment or a day or two after some events happened. I looked back at all of my notes and my calendars, and I wrote looking back at things. So I'm looking past things. So the one question that comes up over and over again as we're out there talking to people is, how do you know the difference? And I wrote this part about Linnea when she was in high school. I knew Linnea was having a very hard time. I think that in the time and place that we both were, we believed that it was primarily stress from school and worries about her future. And perhaps it was. I didn't know how badly she felt on the inside. I wonder if I had read her journals at the time, would I have known that this was the beginning of an illness that would almost take her away from us? Or would I have been overreacting to a teenage girl finding her way? And again, this is the question. How do you know? How do you know? And the psychiatrist told us at one point, you have to wait and see. You wait for the symptoms to actually show themselves and to have a pattern and to come out in a way that you can make a diagnosis. So when she was in her last year of high school, she really wanted to go to a music performance school. She had worked from the time that she started taking piano lessons from me when she was in first grade until she had a teacher that she had to audition for. She was singing, she was doing musical theater, she was immersed in music, and that's what she wanted to do after high school. And she was so stressed about where to go and what to do, and should she, could she make it at Juilliard? Should she do that? Should she do this? And finally, in February of her senior year in high school, we went to Chicago and visited Columbia College, and they really liked her. They offered her a scholarship. She liked them. She made the decision, and things seemed to switch. And she did not have those big nights of long talks and tears and not being able to sleep. And I thought, you know what? I bet this is where all this anxiety and depression came from, was not knowing where to go to college. How simple would that be? So off she went to college.
This is me playing dress up in college. I play dress up all the time, in case you can't tell by all the pictures. So I went off to college. I had I loved my roommates. I loved living in Chicago in the big city. I just loved everything about the music program and the school in general, how it was all of the arts, not just music. I really had a great time making new friends. But then things started to kind of go downhill again, and I couldn't figure out. I thought that moving to Chicago and starting over, I thought this was starting over, that things aren't going to go bad again, that I've resolved my issues, that things have changed, that I'm not going to get depressions or anxiety anymore. So it was rather devastating when I started to really experience symptoms again. This is what I wrote freshman year. I'm here in Chicago, my second semester in, and I feel like there's something happening to me. Lately, my recurring thoughts of anxiety and depression have come back. I need to know I have these feelings again because I love my life, I love the city I'm in, the classes I'm taking, and my roommates. Why then am I feeling this way? I have begun seeing a counselor again. She wants me to keep a journal so I can keep track of my moods. She thinks I might be bipolar. Sure, whatever. And at the time, I had only really thought I experienced depressions, and so hearing the word bipolar was very shocking to me. It was very, it made me angry. It was something that, some label someone was putting on me that, I had read the DSM, I knew what bipolar was, and I hadn't had any manias, and, I'm not crazy. I don't have this. So it was very difficult. But all of my worries and thoughts are those of a normal college freshman, so what makes me, of all people, bipolar? What I didn't know at the time is that there's a thing called bipolar 2, where you have more cyclical depressions and not full-blown manias, but hypomanias, which is a lesser form. And what I also didn't know is that I had experienced a mania, but just didn't know what it was yet.
So she's in college, and she came home during the holiday break, and she said, I think something is really, really wrong with me. And I said, what? And she said, I don't know. She said, I feel like something is coming. And in the book, and in her journal, I don't remember all the words in the book, but I remember that one. She said, something is coming, and it will kill me before the end of the year. And she had this deep sense that there was something really seriously wrong with her. And so my husband flew out. We spent some time with her in Chicago right after she went back after the break. He came back and he said, I don't know. He said he could not reassure us that everything was okay. And it was only a week later that she called and said that she broke up with her boyfriend. And she said, I just don't love anybody anymore. And I don't like him. I don't like myself. I just don't want anything to do with anybody, was the message that she was giving. And her boyfriend called, and he was worried, and he didn't know what was going on. And I was across the state at a conference, and when I got done at this speaking engagement, I looked at my phone, and I had all these missed phone calls from Charlie. And he said to call, and I called him, and he said, you have to come and get her, she's not safe. And she was suicidal, she was extremely bad shape. And so my husband, I tell my students, my graduate students, that not all men are like this and not all women are like this, but there's men that are more apt to, I want to do something. I have to do something, right? And so he could not stay home. He got on the plane and he flew to Chicago, and I started working the phone lines, trying to find help. And that was our big leap into the world of mental illness and how difficult it is to find services. So he brought her back to Seattle. And she came home. She said she was brought home. We say she came home, but she was very ill. But at that point, we had a doctor that would see her. He started her on medication. He said, don't leave her alone. She wasn't completely saying, I'm going to die by my own hand, but she was very, very depressed. And so we kept her at home. And this is what I wrote. We took her home to her bedroom, her stuffed toys, and her dependency on her parents. She constantly wondered and worried and criticized herself for getting to this point when she had everything she wanted. I sat with her on the bathroom floor while she sobbed her heart out and said she would never be well again. Her pain filled our house. It was in every corner. The air felt different than before, tighter and heavier. Every minute of every day, we could all feel this black pain living with us. We are in charge of keeping her safe, but we aren't sure how to do that. And that sentence to me, when I read, we aren't sure how to do that. I teach people supposedly how to do that, but I did not know how to do that. It was very, very difficult. So then, month forward, 2 months maybe, she finally said those magic words to her therapist and said that she wasn't safe. And so she ended up at the ER at Harborview Hospital. Harborview Hospital is our trauma center in Seattle, and it is got the big psych unit. And there's a ER for everyone else, and there's an ER for the psych unit. My husband called me, and he said she had been to her psychologist, and he said, first thing he said to me on the phone was, "Cinda, you have to be brave." I thought she'd been hit by a car. It didn't even enter my mind after everything we had been through that she was in the psychiatric ER suicidal. We sit side by side with Linea between us. We hold hands and don't talk. There's so much going on in the emergency room that is all we can do to stay steady on our bench. The nurse finally calls her name and takes her through the locked doors into the emergency psychiatric unit. As soon as she leaves the waiting room, Kurt and I look at each other with the terror that we both feel. We take a breath and we wait. Neither of us can believe that we are here in this place with our child who wants to kill herself. We actually were there, we got there around noon, and she was transferred by ambulance to the only bed in town across the city to the hospital where my husband works at a little after midnight. Now that was fast. 12 hours in a psych ER was fast for Seattle. Can you imagine if she would have been having heart pain? So still, there was not a diagnosis other than this is more than depression. The decision is still out regarding her diagnosis. Is it depression, bipolar 2, or bipolar 1? The label for her illness is not the issue, but rather the correct medication. She has already been on more than 10 different medications. And that was a huge issue because every one of these illnesses is treated differently with different medications, and they didn't know for sure what it was. And we sat there hearing, we have to wait and see. We have to wait and see. I've been through that with my mom and my sister, who both have autoimmune diseases, one multiple sclerosis and one scleroderma. And both of those were wait and see, watch the symptoms, see the treatment, know what it is. So this was not uncommon, but it doesn't make it any easier.
So one of the things that kept me going was knowing that I wanted to complete college. I think that wanting a degree was just the most important thing in my mind at that point in my life when I was 19, 20, all the way through 23, was wanting to get a degree. And so I wanted to go back to Chicago. I wanted to go back to school. I wanted to see my friends again. And also I had this added pressure that the scholarship that I was getting, you could only take a semester-long medical leave. So if I didn't come back after that summer and come back in fall, then I was going to lose my scholarship, and then I wouldn't be able to go to Columbia at all. So I had that pressure. My psychiatrist that we really, really trusted did not suggest I go back. He really suggested that I stay in Seattle for about a year and really stabilize. My parents didn't want me to go back. Everyone we talked to thought it was a bad idea for me to go back, but I was so determined, and I have such a supportive family that they eventually supported me to go back, and my psychiatrist really helped me figure out a plan. He helped me hook up with a psychiatrist in Chicago that I could work with. He helped me figure out a plan on next steps, being away from my parents. So things were different. I went back and I suddenly had this looming cloud over me of this diagnosis and this big scary word, bipolar. And I had gone through what it actually feels like to almost take your own life several times, and dealing with the fact that this was a lifelong illness I was going to have to live with. I might have to take medications for the rest of my life. I might have to deal with this for the rest of my life. And that was very painful and very scary as a 19-year-old and a 20-year-old. The other thing was that though we found medications to somewhat stabilize me, I was still dealing with depressions. And I started self-medicating, I started cutting, I started throwing up, I started doing anything I could to try to really make myself feel better. So as I developed new and increasingly dangerous coping methods such as self-mutilation and drug and alcohol use, I began to question myself as a perfectionist. What I truly needed was a comforting voice outside of my loving family to tell me that it was okay if I failed or even broke a few rules. And for me, I would go through this thing in my mind of being good or bad. So I would try to be good and be, if I was good, it meant that I could take care of myself and was stable. And then I would be so tired and not be able to take care of myself and not be able to feel right that I would self-medicate, and then I just gave in to being bad. And I would go through this thing in my head of good versus bad. And it would have been nice to have someone tell me that this is a common thing. Self-medication is common. You're not a bad person for trying to find other ways to make yourself feel better when your medications aren't working. That this is common, and let's work with your medication to try to change this so you don't have to feel this way. So that was really difficult. One of the medications they gave me when they weren't quite sure if it was bipolar or depression was Prozac. And this is the reason why you need a good diagnosis. You can't give someone with bipolar Prozac, or I can send them into the mania. So they gave me Prozac, and I became extremely manic. And this is what I wrote then. I'm in an alley next to a rancid dumpster. I'm sitting here, and for the first time in my life, I truly want to run away. I think about the teenage runaways that prowl the Seattle streets and wish I had such little responsibilities, such freedom. I wish I had the freedom to completely drown myself in mind-killing drugs. I want to forget whatever this is that's happening to me. My mind is racing. I don't know why I'm here, but I remember walking, a frantic walk towards nowhere. I remember agitation, anxiety. I remember walking around the Chicago Loop, passing businessmen and watching their glances as they stared me down. My clothes wrinkled and falling off of me. My hair one giant rat's nest on my head. They must have wondered why I was crying. And after this, it continued to get more out of control. They took me off the Prozac once they realized I was manic and gave me some anxiety pills to calm me down, which I ended up overdosing on. So things went from bad to worse, and I was hospitalized again. But it turned out that it was actually a very good wake-up call for me. So I realized after that hospitalization that I couldn't continue self-medicating. I couldn't continue living my life trying to drown all of this in cutting and self-medication, drugs, alcohol. And I needed to start living a healthy life and trying to work with my doctors to get healthy. So I stopped drinking, I stopped using drugs, and I started to work with my doctors more and taking my medication like I was supposed to, being more honest about what medications made me feel like, and finding medication that worked well for me. I also realized that being in the music program was actually really unhealthy for me because being such a perfectionist, at the end of every semester you have to do what's called a jury. And you have to play all of these memorized piano pieces in front of all the piano faculty. And they're very harsh. They want you to remember that you only have one audition in the real world, and that it doesn't matter if you're in the hospital or not, you're playing like an amateur. And it was very painful, especially being a perfectionist, trying to be the best that I could be when my body wasn't letting me. And so I realized that after the end of every semester, when I would have a new depression, or I'd have a mania, or I'd have a rapid cycling episode, I started to see that the stress levels were also causing me to be unhealthy. So I decided to change schools and change cities and begin a new life of taking care of myself.
So she called me and said that she had decided, after looking at a lot of different colleges, that she was going to come to Seattle University. I was like, call me back in 24 hours after you think about it. Don't make any rash decisions. So I got off the phone. I was like, yeah. No tuition, first of all, because I teach at Seattle University. And secondly, it would be really nice to have her back. And when she talked about going back to Chicago, I can't tell you how many people said to us, subtly and not so subtly, why would you have let her go back to Chicago? Why would you do that? And when you think about that from our perspective, you have this young woman who is working so hard to be well and wanted so much to go back to school. And how would we have said, if we would have said to her, no, we're not going to support you, we thought, what is the alternative? What would she have done had we said, no, you can't go back to school? She was so unhappy being out of the college environment. So I was pleased that she made the decision, and it was her decision. It wasn't any of us telling her, no, you can't be in a music program at Chicago. No, that's too stressful. No, it's too far away. You need to be here with these doctors. But she made the decision herself to change her life. And I think that that's the way it has to be. I think you have to be there, and you have to certainly not support unhealthy habits. But on the other hand, you can't force someone to do something, even when they're 22 years old or 21 years old. I think they were 21 maybe? 22? Yeah. So she came back to Seattle and started school at Seattle University.
So that's where we're going to end the story for now. I think it's really important when I speak to share what treatments work for me, because I think that's something that people don't often know. The really important thing for me, well, the first one I actually want to talk about, I forgot to say this in our last presentation, but the first thing that really is important for me is medication. So I might not always want to be on medication. I might not be on medication when I have kids, which is something I would need to figure out with my doctors. But for me, medication allows me to do everything else on this list. Medication gets me stable enough to the point where counseling can begin to work, where exercise can begin to work, where all these other things can I can start working on getting other treatment. The counseling I use is cognitive behavior therapy, and one of the issues that when I first started seeing a counselor, I dealt with issues like having a diagnosis, the grief that goes along with having a chronic illness, acceptance. I dealt with all of that. I dealt with the post-traumatic stress of almost losing your life twice. I dealt with a lot of the kind of hypochondriasis that comes with, like, am I getting sick again? Is this a symptom? Is this something I need to worry about? I dealt with that, but now one of the things that I work on really, that I think it causes some of my depressions and causes the most grief right now, is my perfectionism. So I work on cognitive behavior therapy, where they teach me to look at my, quote, dysfunctional thoughts, they call them. So my thoughts of not being thin enough, or which goes along with my eating disorder, not being smart enough, not being funny enough, or saying the wrong thing, and checking reality with that to see if I actually am making sense, or if this is just a delusion in my mind that I've created because I have such bad self-esteem. So I work on that in counseling now. Hospitalization is, it's really crucial when you're at a point where you just aren't safe, where your family can no longer, family, friends, whoever you consider family, can just not babysit you anymore. When it's just dangerous for you not to be watched 24/7. So hospitalization was really important. Something that's really controversial that works really well for me is ECT, or electroconvulsive therapy, or shock therapy. A lot of people don't know that they still use this, but it's actually being used all over the country and works really, really well for a lot of people. It doesn't work perfectly for everyone. Some people have memory problems, but I've used it 2 different hospitalizations, and it's not only allowed me, from the last time I had it, to be happy for like a year and a half, which has never happened in my life since I was 14, to allow me to go down on the very lowest of my medication. So ECT was really, it's kind of a miracle treatment for me. It doesn't work for everyone, but for me, it's the first thing I request if I'm in the hospital because I'm feeling dangerous. Skills training is kind of cognitive behavior therapy. Lifestyle change, which I talked about, really deciding, not to use drugs. I do drink now, but I drink in moderation, and if I realize that I'm drinking more and that it could be a sign of something, I just stop drinking for like a month or a little bit longer, just to kind of get myself back in rhythm and make sure that I'm just having like a glass of wine with dinner, or just if I go out with friends, it's not every single weekend, so making sure that I'm watching the way that I drink carefully. Support network, obviously I have an amazing family, but also having friends that can be there for me, good times and bad times. The really bad times when I do need someone to babysit me because I'm going to hurt myself, versus the good times when I just, need to go to a movie instead of going to a party because it's healthcare for me. I like to add advocacy because for me, advocacy has become a huge part of my treatment. It's knowing that, number one, there are other people out there with similar stories to mine. As I advocate and share my story, I hear stories from thousands of people that have gone through the same things. It's also finally being open about my life, and I kind of like to compare it to coming out when you're gay, and it's like covering up half of your life the whole time is so exhausting. So to be able to actually be out and open about what you've gone through, it makes things so much easier. I feel like you can make connections much quicker when you're not trying to hide who you are and what's part of your life. So advocacy has been a huge part of my treatment as well.
I don't know how many of you are going to be working with families who might have mental health conditions in their families, or have friends, or 1 in 4. But family treatment, I think, is really, really critical and important as part of the whole package treatment. And that would include counseling for both individuals and couples. A lot of couples don't make it together with someone in their family with a mental health condition. It's really, really difficult. And couples like watching Linea with her boyfriend and how they've learned to deal with everything is really important. So being able to do those things. Support groups, there's some great support groups out there. And again, they help find resources and they help normalize this, make this like it's not something that you should hide. When Linea was first sick and was in the hospital just down the hill from my university and I was teaching, I just made the decision I was not going to hide what was wrong with her. And so when I had to tear off to the hospital to meet with the medical team, and people wanted to know where I was, or I needed someone to cover my class, and they said, well, what's wrong with your daughter? I didn't say, well, she's just sick, or she's whatever. I just thought, no, if she had diabetes, I wouldn't hide it. And so I said she's in the hospital for depression, because at the time, that's what we thought it was. So, fourth bullet, staying close to family and friends who understand, and don't spend your energy convincing those that don't. There are still people out there who really have a hard time believing that mental health condition is a physical illness, and that it's not somehow your fault, or that it's not something you should have done differently, or if we wouldn't have let Linea go off to college, or if we wouldn't have let her take piano lessons when she was in 2nd grade, or whatever it is, there's this blame. And so, you do your best, but at a certain point you surround yourself with people who really, really get it and support you when you need to have that support. Advocacy, speaking out. Not everyone has to share their story like we have. I have grad students that are taking my class, and they're kind of the first few times they're like, how's Charlie? He's the ex-boyfriend in the book. They really want to know what Charlie's doing, but they really don't want me to know they've read the book and they know everything about my family. And then after we get a few weeks together, they realize it's okay, but they all come in kind of like, oh, I read the book. And I don't assign my book, by the way, to my students. And the last one is honesty. If anyone were to say to me, and we've heard it a lot of times, and I think you would agree with me, and if she doesn't, she'll tell me. If they say, well, how did you and your mom stay so close? Or how did you and Linea keep from having problems or issues? Because it's tough. You can have a lot of problems around this. I think if I could say it in one word, it's honesty. It's me being able to say to her when she was younger, I am scared to death you didn't get your meds refilled. Or I'm seeing symptoms and I don't want to say anything to you, but because what if it makes you mad, and what if you won't talk to me, but I'm scared. And her saying to me, back off mom, I'm fine, or please don't take such good care. She told me this one, she said, don't take such good care of me because I think I may never be able to take care of myself. And that one really struck me, because as special educators, we have to take the vow we will enable. And so I was like wanting to help so much. So I think that's been a big one, honesty with each other, honesty with her dad, with my husband. We'll have things where they'll be like, do you think she's okay? Do you think she's okay? I mean, stop asking me that. Just pick up the phone and call her. And so, the honesty all around is very, very important. So, this one, she's taking it from me, but I have a photo. When she was hospitalized the first time, this says, remember that on Tuesday night you felt happy. And though it may disappear, it will return. She wrote this in the center unit of Harborview Psychiatric Center, which there's north and south or east and west or something, and then there's center. Center is big time lockdown. The others are locked down, but this one is the one where you stand at the door, you take off your belt, you leave your bag, you get buzzed in. Every person in there is in a room by themselves that's locked in with someone watching them. And that's where she was. And it was unbelievable to me that she was in this lockdown. And she had ECT. We were, of course, terrified. Not only were we terrified, but my husband, who is in the medical field, was angry. He could not believe that they would even consider doing ECT. But her first treatment stopped the suicidal ideation. And she woke up, and the nurse said, how are you? And she said, I'm hot. And she said, how are your thoughts? And she said, they're gone. Meaning the thoughts of hurting herself were gone. It didn't mean they stayed away forever, and that didn't mean that was the last ECT treatment she had, but it stopped it so that she could start getting well. So she asked for, and she didn't have this because she couldn't have any of this stuff in this room, she asked for a piece of paper and a pencil, and she wrote this. We had to take the pencil away, and she taped this on the wall beside her bed. And I've kept this all these years, and I think this is the message for people with severe mental illness is it may disappear, but it will return. There is hope, there is wellness, there is treatment.
We'll just go over this really quickly because people are always curious. So I did get a Bachelor's of Arts in English and Creative Writing. I always was mad at myself because it took 6 years, but I guess when you change schools, change majors, have a medical leave, that's how long it takes. So I've begun to be okay with graduating in 6 years from college.
She's a slacker.
I'm such a slacker, 6 years, man. So I signed a contract for our book actually the day after I walked for graduation. So we always make the joke that when people say, well, what do you do with a creative writing degree? I can say, well, I sold a book the next day. So that was pretty remarkable, amazing that happened that way. I'm now a national speaker. I speak at national and international conferences, both with my mom and by myself, and writer. I've had the amazing opportunity to intern with the World Health Organization in Geneva, Switzerland, looking at mental health policy. And we'll talk about that a little bit, but just an amazing opportunity to go and see what's happening internationally with global mental health. I'm currently working at Harborview Medical Center, which is where I was hospitalized as a research assistant on a research grant. And I took a trip to India in April that I'll talk about, where I looked at community mental health workers there. And then I'm also currently, what my next steps are, I'm researching master's and doctoral programs, looking at policy for mental health and also looking at jobs in mental health policy. So we'll do the question section here. So if you want to just pass it to Mary.
We hope you have questions.
If you have questions. And if your questions don't get answered this time, we'll do it again after our next section. excessive alcohol does. If I have a glass of wine with dinner, it doesn't. Although if I'm feeling unstable, I don't want to have just one glass of wine. And I always notice patterns that when I'm feeling really anxious, or I'm feeling really stressed out, or I'm feeling really depressed, I have a really bad cutoff, so I can't just stop at one. So that always kind of perpetuates a problem. The more I drink, the more depressed that I get. So when I'm stable, having a glass of wine with dinner is not a problem. When I'm depressed, it is.
And one thing I've noticed is that, earlier I would worry about this. Hold it like an ice cream cone. She's a singer, she taught me that. Earlier, I would worry about that, but now if she's in a episode, not an episode, because she doesn't have these huge episodes, but when she's not feeling well, she doesn't drink. And I've noticed that she knows when not to. So another question. Does bipolar go along with obsessive compulsive disorder? I can answer that one from the scientific piece, but you can. It can be co-occurring, certainly, but it doesn't mean that necessarily the diagnosis of obsessive compulsive disorder always goes along with bipolar disorder.
And for a lot of people that live with bipolar, there are a lot of kind of obsessive things that we do sometimes. I just kind of have little quirks like that sometimes I am more obsessive about, like perfectionism or things like that. I think this is also just personality. When I would practice the piano, I would play one small measure until it was perfect, and then I played two measures until they were perfect and move on that way. And if I messed up, I'd go back to one again. So I would do things like that, but I don't know if that's personality or bipolar.
And that's another one. People always say, oh, she's so OCD. I had a woman present in my class that has OCD, and it's its own illness, but the symptoms can show up in this perseverating, ruminating kind of symptoms in bipolar disorder. We got a lot of questions, so we'll try to not take too long answering them. Here's a really good one. What's the difference between depression and bipolar?
So bipolar has depression, but it also has mania. So depression is just the really low mood. It comes with, a lot of times, extreme depression comes with suicidal ideation, the just not wanting to be alive anymore. And depression it's very, very common. So depression, people can have chronic depression, which is its own illness that you might have to treat for the rest of your life, but there can also be situational depression that people might have that comes out of grief, or that comes out of a certain situation, like getting fired or something. But depression could follow that. But there are people that have chronic depression they live with. Bipolar, you have the chronic depression, but you also have either a hypomania for bipolar 2 or a mania for bipolar 1, which is elevated moods, talking really fast, thinking really fast, impulsive behavior, kind of dangerous behavior. And then what I have, I have more mixed episodes, which are actually the most dangerous. So you have all of the energy of a mania, but you have the depression at the same time. So that's when people are most likely to actually die by suicide, because a lot of times when you're depressed, you're just too tired to actually do anything. But if you have a mixed episode, you have the energy to follow through with the very scary plans you're making.
So this is a good question on that. When you were in a manic state, what did you do? What did it look like? How did you know it was manic?
Well, my first mania, which I didn't know was a mania at the time, I was in Scotland and I was visiting a friend there. And I just couldn't figure out why he couldn't keep up with me. I was having a great time, and I was...
Jet lag and time change will do it.
Jet lag and time change. And so I would get up at 7 every morning and make him go sightseeing so we could see all of Scotland. And then we would party every night until like 4 in the morning, and I would drink a ton and made out with like all of his friends and like was just crazy. And then I couldn't figure out why he couldn't go to bed at 4 and then get up at 7 the next day and do it for a week. And so that was my first mania, and when I came back and they had asked me if I had a mania before, I was like, no, I thought Europe was the like what cured depression. I thought that it was just being, 19, and in Europe I thought that's what you did. So that was one mania.
And I mean, she's been more the depressive side, but she called one time with the Prozac. She called me in the morning and she said, I think they found the right meds. I feel really good. I got up early, I got my laundry done, and by noon the calls were like, yeah, and I repainted all the walls in the house, and I cleaned the bathroom, and I cleaned the closets, and and then the next call was, my mind is racing, and I'm really feeling awful. And I think that's the point, is that manias are not, I've heard you say this many times, it's not, that high goes bad in a real hurry, I guess, unless you're in Scotland.
Yeah, and so also for me, because hypomanias are like the beginning of a mania, really. They're like when you feel really confident and you feel really great, have a lot of energy, but then it either gets followed by getting really out of control or getting really depressed. And I always ask my doctor, like, is there some kind of medication I can take so I can just have hypomania all the time? But what mania actually leads to for me is really agitation and anxiety. And it's not fun anymore. I get so agitated. I started scratching myself and I couldn't stop until it was bleeding. I had weird impulsive behaviors. So it's not just fun happiness. It gets really scary.
And there's
You can also have delusions.
yeah. There's also a number of questions about meds. So like, what meds did you start on that didn't work at first? And what are you on now that did work? And what meds did you try, and then did marijuana help?
See, we're honest about everything. Like
I just say a little thing here. She took me one time to meet her psychologist in Chicago, and her psychologist is like, are we going to talk about the issue? And Linea says, Jordan's my other daughter, Linea says, my mom knows all about my drug use, go ahead. And so, yes, and we also make jokes about this. And I know a lot of people like kind of go, why are they laughing? But it is a funny world, and a lot of things happen that you have no control over. So please know that we're not laughing at the illness. We're laughing because it's life.
And sometimes I think that one of the things that keeps us going is having a sense of humor in this, because it's just so painful if you don't. You have to just kind of take it with a grain of salt. But medications, medication and marijuana. Medications, I actually really wish that I could be on lithium. There's a lot of people that are just on lithium as one medication. That's all they take for their whole lives, and it works great. I've tried it 3 separate times and had weird side effects every time. It doesn't work for me. Lithium is usually the #1 medication they give for bipolar. I'm on a medication called Lamictal, which has become kind of the #2 they give for bipolar. And because Lamictal just kind of affects the depressions, it doesn't affect the manias as much. I'm also on a second medication called Geodon, which is an antipsychotic that keeps the manias down. So I'm on those 2 medications. The marijuana thing, I actually know a lot of people that live with mental illnesses that say that marijuana really helps them. I have a friend who has schizophrenia and bipolar, and he thinks that that really is a good medication for him to help him keep going. Personally, it makes me really agitated and anxious and depressed the next day, so I find it just doesn't work for me. So I think it's kind of a case-by-case basis. The reason I don't use marijuana is because I know it makes me feel horrible the next day.
In Washington State, it's legal, so. We're a very liberal state now. I just want to add one thing about one of the other questions on the medication. The very first medication she ever went on was Wellbutrin, and I think that was part of the diagnosis, was antidepressants on their own don't typically work very well with bipolar disorder. And so that starts to make it look more like it might be bipolar or bipolar 2 because the antidepressants weren't working. And the Prozac in particular, that was pretty much, okay, it's likely bipolar because the Prozac made her manic in a big hurry. So, and the medications, I think one of the things that you went through just a year or so ago was the angst of having to change meds again. I guess it was 2 years before you went to the doctor. You kind of think that you got this med that's going to work for the rest of your life, and then it's got to be tweaked. And so constantly working with the doctor on that. So, okay, medication. Are you affiliated with NAMI at all? Yes, we are. In fact, if you go to the NAMI website, the NAMI national website, her face is up there. It may be gone today, but it's been up there all week. Yeah, I was there this morning. It's like, yeah, we love NAMI, and we get phone calls, and this is going to lead to the next question. We get phone calls and emails from people all over the country who are searching for help, don't know where to go, don't know who to talk to, and on the NAMI homepage, there's a thing, find local NAMI, and you can find your state, your county, and your local NAMI offices. Again, if you're feeling really horrible, you probably don't want to have to make all those calls, because a couple calls and you want to hang up. But someone to be able, there's a really good family support group. So NAMI is a good one. And then this one I'm going to give to you, Mary, because we usually ask, we usually ask that there's some people like that around that can answer these questions. But if you were right here, living in this area, and you had a friend who needed help that you were worried about, or you needed to find a doctor, where do you go? Who do you talk to?
You can either call the crisis line in any county. If you're a student here at Midstate, go and talk to your program counselor. They can give you all kinds of resources. So come to Student Affairs. If your counselor's not available for your program, somebody in Student Affairs will be there to help you.
And
Even if it's for somebody else.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, even if it's
Yeah.
for a family member.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just come in and we'll get you connected to a lot of resources.
County mental health department.
Yep. They're probably the crisis line number for this county.
One of them.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, and there's one last question, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but again, check with Mary afterwards if you want more resources. But borderline personality disorder, which is another mental health condition, different kinds of treatments and medications. Where do you go to find help for that? What kind of medications? And again, everything you say is confidential, but you can, go and talk and be prepared to be told to go somewhere else and somewhere else. And the next half we're going to talk about is when you're looking for help, find someone that can help you go to somewhere else and make the other phone call. And the other phone call. Yeah, go see Hawks. Because, last comment, I got a call from one of Linea's friends one night late, and her brother was psychotic and suicidal. And she and her mom were trying to figure out where to go and what to do. But they were in the midst of it. And I said, let me call and get you a number and a name. It took me 15 minutes. I mean, he was not actively suicidal at that moment. They would have called 911. But he was saying weird things, acting psychotic. They wanted to talk to someone. I had to make 3 or 4 or 5 different phone calls to actually get to someone so then I could call her and say, Mary is waiting at 206-296-5888 for your call. And then she could call. And she also had to step outside to make that call because she couldn't let her brother hear that because he thought the cops were going to get them. So, they have someone to help. All right, should we go to the next section? Okay, we're right on time.
So keep writing questions down. So moving forward to more recently, in April I was in India, and after a 6-hour 3-stop flight stopping in Mumbai and all these other small towns, I finally got to a small town in Kerala, the state of Kerala, where I was able to work with this organization, MPAC. And I was sitting in this small village. It was a town, the house wasn't even really in a village, but a small house in a small village with a man who had really extreme mental illness and was dealing with a lot of difficult times. And I was watching the way that these community mental health workers were working with him. And I just sat there really realizing that though we are so different, though we speak very different languages, I had to have everything translated to me, though His house was very different than mine. His community was very different than mine. I'm from a big city. Though everything was different, we were so connected on so many levels, and we went through a lot of the same things, and it just kind of blew me away how connected we were. The other thing that blew me away was the effect that the empowerment of a community can have on individuals living with mental illness and on just the community in general. So that's what we're going to kind of talk about in this next section, is empowerment and community empowerment and how that can make all the difference. So my definition of empowerment has kind of changed throughout the last 10 years. 10 years ago, I thought empowerment was, ignoring my mental health situation and choosing whatever college I wanted to go to as far away from my parents as I could get, and just ignoring my symptoms. I thought that was, me choosing my life. That ended up limiting me in many ways. Not that going to Chicago did, but ignoring my symptoms, ignoring the things that I was really feeling, ended up limiting me, because 2 years later, my idea of empowerment was choosing whether or not to have a grilled cheese for lunch in the lockdown psych unit at Harborview. So empowerment changes, and it was a slow process. So when I was diagnosed with depression, because that was what I was first diagnosed with at 16, then finally bipolar at 19, and then today at 27, I think of myself as a very empowered individual, and that I'm able to, I go around and I speak, I share my story, I have a book, I speak with my mom all over, I speak by myself. I consider myself, able to make choices in my life and to be empowered, and yet I'm still constantly faced with stigma and really all these things trying to hold me back. And one of the things I've always confronted with whenever I speak is people saying, well, you don't look like someone who, and I think, you don't look like someone who what? You don't look like someone who's been hospitalized in a psych unit. You don't look like someone who tried to kill yourself. You don't look like someone who, overdosed. What does that look like? You don't look like someone who's crazy. And it's just amazing to me because, actually 20% of America has a mental health condition. So it could look like any one of us. But unfortunately, and this is a lot of time in cities, what it does look like, it looks like people that are homeless, it looks like people that are abandoned, people that are really unstable. It looks like all those horrible stories in the media all the time of all this gun violence. To America, that's what mental illness looks like right now. Because if you're living stable with a mental illness, and there's so much stigma out there, and there's so much stigma that could risk you losing your job, your friends, any kind of support, why would you talk about it? It makes it difficult. And so it's important to know, as I talk, to see that, it looks like all of us. It could look like any of us. And that if we do live with it, and we do live well with it, then we need to talk about it, because it doesn't look like people that are violent necessarily. It doesn't look like people that are homeless. It looks like all of us. So I think that's really important to address. So for me, I've been really lucky. I've been able to see the people that are living really well with it. I've been able to see people like, I just came from Boston. I was getting hot right there. It looks really up here. Where I was with Patrick Kennedy, who lives with bipolar disorder, and he was hosting the Kennedy Forum, where he introduced Vice President Biden to talk about mental health. So it looks like someone who is very influential in mental health, who's doing a lot of things to change mental health, who's also living with bipolar and substance use disorder. So it looks like people like Patrick Kennedy. It looks like people like Dr. Gabriel Jamieson, who is the top researcher on bipolar disorder out of Johns Hopkins. It looks like some very high accomplished professionals as well. So we need to know that it looks like that. And that it looks like from the man in the house who I was visiting, who was able to, not be locked up in a room for years because he's unstable, but because MHAT in India found him and got him services, he can now function again.
I just want to make a comment about this slide. I mean, does anybody notice anything about this slide? Kind of stands out. Like everybody's wearing ties, everybody's, a man, and then you've got this young woman. And I think that it's the young students and the young people that are coming out that need to be at the table, because that's what's going to make a change. And I know that all of us who've been in the field and all of us with voices, we've got some clout and we should need to continue to talk about it. We need to have more young people at the table. She just got back from this event with Chelsea Clinton and Vice President Biden and all these folks, and very few young people are there. And it's not that it was just a party that you get invited, you got to dress. It's like those voices are being heard. So Linea's going to share a couple of ways that organizations can happen on campus. But every time I see that picture, I'm struck by how a lot of this doesn't include the voices of the next generation that's really going to make some difference. So here we are. This is Sanjay Gupta from CNN. It's a test.
It's horrible with the name, so I'm going to test her and see if she can remember this time.
Alex Crosby, CDC, on your left. I'll never get Ray's last name. I don't even remember it at all. But we were at an event in Atlanta just about a month ago, and it was pretty amazing to sit up there with this esteemed panel and Sanjay Gupta as our facilitator, with a room full of people that were, some of them knew. A man stood up, a 64-year-old man stood up, who said that his son had just been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and he said, before 2 weeks ago, I had no idea what this was, what the symptoms were, where to get help, what to do. He was completely lost. And another person that stood up that said, this is the first time I'm publicly announcing that I live with a mental illness, and I want to be part of the group. It was a really amazing night. But Dr. Crosby, talked about suicide. The statistics on suicide are dismal. And I wrote a paper not long ago that I still have it on my laptop or on my desktop because I'm not ready to put it out there yet. But it's about suicide and about how in every single gathering of people that we talk about mental illness, suicide's in the back corner. Everyone knows people or have been affected by suicide, and we don't talk about it. And we don't see it as a symptom of an illness. My brother died of suicide, and my family, my father never, ever used the word suicide. He had this whole big story about how he was trying to get a gun out from underneath the front seat of the car while driving 60 miles an hour with a cop following him, and it accidentally went off. And he could not get his head around death by suicide. And so I think we need to talk about that as well. And Mary was sharing with us the work that you all do on campuses here about knowing the symptoms and where to go and what to do, and that you don't say anything about it because it's going to make it happen if you bring it up. You do say something about it, you get it out of that corner, and you talk about it so that we can reduce the number of people who die by suicide. Third leading cause of death in young people. This is not right. I mean, this is something that can be treated. So that was that piece. The gorgeous Linnea, she was fantastic. I did some other thing, and then we have Ray Kotwicki. I could spell it, but I can't say it. Dr. Kotwicki, Ray, is the medical director at Emory Psychiatric Unit, and he was sharing research that we'd heard previously down in California at a science event about the new research that's coming out about mental illness. And he gave a talk. His little portion of this piece was about full body illness, and that the research is really starting to show that depression and bipolar disorder may very well be an inflammatory disease. Interesting. Because that means, number one, it's not a behavior problem, which is where we're at right now, and number two, it is whole body. So A lot of stuff will be coming out with that. But I stepped into the world of mental illness in kind of a big hurry with our trip to the ER in Harborview. And I went in knowing more than a lot of people, but I can only say that I found out how much I didn't know, what a difficult maze it is. Like I said, it's not just a maze, it's going down a very scary, dark alley, blindfolded, trying to figure out where to go and what to do. And stigma. There is stigma around mental illness, even for those of us who think we know a whole lot, which I found I didn't know very much at all. And I, too, had stigma around mental illness, and something that really changed that for me was when Linea was in the psychiatric unit at Harborview. She was with mainly men, a lot of men who were homeless, a lot of men who were in much worse shape than her. Like she told me she had to go to the drug groups, and she said, I know where to get drugs in Seattle now. You know, I know the hand signals, I know the streets, I know where to go. I was horrified and terrified that she was in this unit. You know, if I would have known better probably at the time and had the money, I would have put her where most of our friends would put their children, which was in a private facility. We would be around the riffraff. And so I wasn't there very long before I figured out that man could have been my son, my brother, my husband. We're only this far from being that person on the street. And I was getting into the elevator, and one of the patients who had earned his right to do a 20-minute smoke break was in the elevator. He was a very tall, older man. And he said to me, how is your daughter doing? And I gave him the look. But in my mind, I was saying to myself, don't you get near my daughter? Don't you ask about my daughter? Don't you even look at my daughter, because you might be crazy, you might be violent, you might hurt her. But I didn't say that because I'm a nice woman, right? So I said, she's fine. She's doing well. She's better. And he said, I pray for her every night. He said, me, I'm in here for the drink and the alcohol. And he said, but it's not right for the young ones. I pray for her every night. And I just was like, what stigma? This man is no different than my daughter. He has an illness just as much as my daughter. So compassion and empathy.
So one of the things that really got us going was that first trip to the ER and seeing the disparities that were happening. So when I think about the disparities, I think about my two roommates at Harborview. The first roommate was a woman who had a drug addiction problem. She was addicted to heroin, and they had given her methadone, and she also had depressions and maybe something else. And so she overdosed on methadone and was sent to Harborview. She also came from an abusive household, and so she was in there trying to get treatment for her, because she tried to commit suicide by overdosing on methadone, trying to get treatment for her depression, her suicidal ideation. And her time was up. She didn't have the resources to stay in the hospital, and though the nurses and social workers wanted to keep her there, they had to pretty much kick her out because there was no money to keep her there. And she was crying, you know, he's going to find me, he's going to kill me, and all they could do was send her to a women's shelter. That was the only resources they had available to her, and so she was sent to a women's shelter, and you know, I have no idea what happened to her now. My second roommate was a different story. She says that she said the wrong thing at the wrong time. She said that she wanted to kill herself, and her niece called the police, and the police brought her in, and she had to stay for a 72-hour hold because she said she was suicidal, and the police brought her in. So the first day there, she said she was fine. It was just the wrong thing at the wrong time. She didn't understand why. And then by the time that it was about time for her to leave, it really sunk into her that she had this. She was very suicidal, and she needed a lot of help. But she was able to stay because she had the insurance to keep her there. So it was really difficult to see that. But just having insurance doesn't make it all better either, because she had a tough time as well, because she was sent there by the police. She didn't pack a bag. She wasn't prepared. So she had no clothes. And her parents, who were from a a very wealthy family in Bellevue where Microsoft is, and they would not visit her at the psychiatric unit. They wouldn't bring her clothes, so they met my parents in a parking lot with a paper bag and gave her, my mom, clothes to bring to her at the hospital. So it's just tough. It's tough for everyone. It's tough no matter which way you look, and it's really hard to see the stigma, not only just the stigma, but how broken the system is. There was just this article that came out in the Seattle Times about something that's happening in Washington that is just horrific. It's called boarding, and I saw this firsthand. So in Washington State, we are, I think, the 50th state on psychiatric beds. We have the least amount of psychiatric beds per patient. People actually need them. So we have what we call boarding. People will, like the police will be called if someone is acting erratic or if someone is dangerous or someone is suicidal, and the court will rule that they have to get treatment, that they have to be in for a 72-hour hold. But we don't have any beds for them. So what we have to do, we have to keep them in the hospital for 72 hours, but we don't have a bed, so they have to stay on the gurney in the ER in the hall for 72 hours, where they're not getting any treatment. There's not enough staff to get them treatment. They're merely holding them until the court says that they can go. So these people are not getting treatment, they're not getting support, they're not getting beds, and the staff is overburdened by all these patients that they can't take care of. So it's really tough. And when I was first hospitalized, the thing that stood out to me the most was we were there, for 10, 12 hours, but I got a bed. My dad works at a hospital, my mom works, teaches, master's level students about special education and behavior disorders, emotional behavior disorders, whatever they call them. And I got a bed. A middle-class white girl from Bellevue got a bed. And this homeless man in the hallway had to stay the night on a gurney. And it just killed me. He was crying for his mom. When my mom was here, he would take me home and watch me and take care of me for the night. And he had to stay in that emergency room for the night. So that's kind of where advocacy began. Just not being able to live with the injustice that is happening out there. So that kind of goes along with the whole issue of becoming empowered. My process of becoming, quote, empowered was gradual. It was first being able to tell my doctors I didn't like the medication I was on, then slowly moving up to sharing my story and being comfortable talking about it, then moving very quickly into publishing a book and speaking nationally and traveling internationally. I got to work at WHO, where I got to visit Greek hospitals and facilities to look for human rights injustices and human rights violations. I got to look at the mental health policy that was happening in the small country of Lesotho, which is right in the middle of South Africa. I got the chance to work with Glenn Close and her organization Bring Change to Mind, with Patrick Kennedy, with all these cool people. Got the opportunity to work with filmmaker Delaney Rustin on her film, the first film on global mental health called Hidden Pictures, which you should go to our website, we'll put it up later, and I think you can maybe screen the film still. But what I realized in all of this, and all of these cool things I get to do, and all of this quote empowerment, is that, empowerment is a privilege. I'm really privileged to be able to be up here and to do all these things. I have an amazing family. I have a really amazing medical team that listens to me, that supports my decisions, helps me make better decisions, helps me find the right medication. And I was born in America, where we have, though our system is in a kind of bad place, it's much better than a lot of places where they might just chain me up to a tree for a year. So empowerment is a privilege. And I think it's because of that privilege that we need to make a difference, that we need to take advantage of it and start speaking out for other people. So I'm going to go back really quick to the driver, or I haven't even told you the driver yet, the man in India whose house I was in. He was an auto rickshaw driver, and he was dealing with, in India they don't necessarily give it labels. He had depression, he had psychosis, and he was somewhat violent, not to others, but like he would punch a wall or kick things when he was feeling agitated. And so the community really pushed back against him. They thought that they were afraid of him, they thought he had evil spirits in him, and that, he should be like locked away somewhere. But this organization, MHAT, the Mental Health Action Team, they are an amazing organization in the state of Kerala in India, and actually community mental health workers are being trained all over India, so this is happening all over India. And there are 300 community mental health workers that have been trained that are just everyday people who have no experience. Well, some of them may have experience in mental health personally, but they don't have any training in mental health. But they get trained to go and assess for mental health conditions, to provide support, and kind of act as almost social workers, and to see if they need medication changes so they can tell the one psychiatrist that they have working for them. They have 3 social workers and a psychologist. And these community mental health workers that are in this picture with me, they visit their 1,500 chronically mentally ill patients every week. They check in with them every single week. And what was amazing, every time I went and talked to the different families that I went and visited, I just traveled around with community mental health workers, and I always asked about stigma. And it was amazing to see that stigma had reduced almost completely, because these community mental health workers were the peers of the town people. They lived in the villages with all the other villagers that were judging the person with the mental illness. And the villagers began to see that this man had people that cared about him, that weren't afraid of him, that were going and checking on him and helping him. And then they started to see that he just had an illness, that he wasn't, it wasn't a problem. Some of them might have still thought it was evil spirits, but they wanted to support him. So it was amazing to see the switch. And one of the things that my mom talks about that I'm going to steal from her is in the U.S., moms give their stories to their daughters. In the U.S., if a mother has breast cancer, then we bring her casseroles, we take care of kids to school, we take care of her family, we make sure that we go and help her clean her house. If a mother has depression, we think that her kids are dirty. We don't understand why they're late to school. We think she's a bad mom. And it's really frustrating. It's really sad to see the lack of support. And what was amazing was in India, in these communities where the mental health workers were, the communities treated it like breast cancer. They helped fix the leak in the roof. Because he didn't have a commercial license to be an auto rickshaw driver in the cities, the community started hiring him individually and paying him so that he could still support the family because he was a sole supporter. They just all rallied around and became an empowered community because they saw their peers were not afraid of mental illness anymore, and that it was just the same as a physical illness, something that could be treated and worked with. So it was beautiful, and I went in with my American mindset that I could go and teach them something, and they just taught me everything. There was nothing that I could help them learn. I mean, they taught me everything, so it was really amazing. So I also, other takeaways, realizing that this can start a really grassroots effort, thinking about those small communities that can start making big changes. I think that what's happening here and what we've seen of everyone really realizing that there was a problem with suicide and then taking action and making it important to talk about mental illness and mental health conditions, that spark I think is so powerful and so important. That's what's going to change the country. So it's been really, really wonderful to be here and to see all the work that you're doing in your communities. It's just been awesome. So to end, I just want to say, being a mental health advocate is really difficult. It's really taxing, it's really hard, and there's a lot of burnout that comes with it because you see the injustice is happening, you see the stigma, you see the lack of support. It was Vice President Biden, one of the things he said, the two things lacking are the knowledge of the brain and people not receiving services because of stigma, because they're too afraid to seek services in the first place, which I think is true. And to be honest, 3 weeks ago, I was just about ready to give up. I was so tired and just felt like, what's the point? Nothing's changing. But since then, you know, it's a process. You keep moving forward. And there's a thing called activist burnout that you go through and you work through. And so the two things that changed for me just in this past week, since Tuesday, was attending that Kennedy Forum where I saw the Vice President talking about mental illness and how it was important. The Kennedy Forum is actually based on JFK's Community Mental Health Act that was 50 years ago. The anniversary was, I think, on Wednesday of 50 years since that act was passed. And it was to deinstitutionalize America. So it was to get all of the institutions that were full of the chronically mentally ill, that were, you know, places like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest that were like really dirty and scary, and trying to get people into communities where they could have treatment in their own communities and not be locked away in these facilities for years. It worked on some levels. Like in Seattle, we now have a lot of community mental health organizations that do a lot of really great work. But because of a lot of the institutionalization, it also caused a lot of homelessness and a lot of people not being able to find services once they were kind of moved out of the hospital, the mental hospital system. So the Kennedy Forum was to address this. It's to say it's 50 years and let's change this. Let's try to take that idea of trying to make this a community effort, to bring this out in the community, to work as a community, and let's actually make that happen. So it was just so beautiful to see that the actual Vice President of the United States of America was there caring about mental health. Secretary Sebelius from Human Health Human Services was there. Chelsea Clinton was there, and it wasn't just Democrats that were there. Democrats, Republicans, it's a bipartisan issue. It's everyone is affected by mental illness. So it was amazing to see that, you know, that people actually are, powerful people are caring about mental illness and trying to make changes. The second thing that I think is really important that keeps me going is being here and being in rooms with individuals that care, that want to listen to our story, and to know that each of you has the power to take this story to one other person. To be like, you know, I heard this girl talk today about her depression or about her suicidal ideation. Have you ever felt like this? And to be like, this is normal. I heard that it's 20% of America that deals with a mental health condition. And have you ever felt like this? To share that people can live well with a mental illness. So it's really knowing that all of you care and that each of you has the power to make small changes in your community. So I just want to end saying, you know, this is a civil rights issue, this is a human rights issue. So let's all take action in our own ways. So thank you for having us. We'll go over some resources and some questions if you have further questions, because we have some time.
That's a NAMI group, get involved. We had people join us with, you know, that had never spoken public before or been involved in any kind of mental health organization or walk. And we had people who've been, you know, every single walk that they had done for years. So all kinds of people that came out for the first time around mental health. So we have lots of resources. So the mental health action team that Linea talked about is called MHAT, and there's the link. We're going to send this to Mary. There's on our website is all these other resources we're talking about, but this one is not there yet. We've been on the road so much we haven't updated it. But there's the MHAT website's got some great
And the
videos.
NAMI link is wrong.
Yeah.
It's actually an I, not E.
Yeah, it's NAMI.org, not name.org. If it was live, I could take you to it and show you Linea's face, but the Kennedy Forum, and then Hidden Pictures is just, you can Google it. It's a great video. It's really exciting. Linea worked on it from the very beginning when it was first just an idea before Delaney went to India. So check that out.
So these are just some college resources that we like to put up. The Balanced Mind is actually, it's not really college resources, it's more younger, like elementary school to high school. They deal a lot, it's with mood disorders, and they have a lot of, they have amazing parent support groups that are online, so you can talk online with other parents about what their kids are going through and how to find resources for yours. Half of us is where we got the statistic of 1 in 2 college students has a mental health condition, whether it's not just schizophrenia, it's, the main one is actually anxiety. So most college students have anxiety, depression is second, then there's eating disorders, alcohol abuse, things like that. Active Minds is amazing. I don't know if you have an Active Minds chapter, but if you're interested in starting one, Active Minds chapters are like clubs where you talk about mental health, you have events about mental health, you do your part to start advocacy in your community, and it starts in colleges, so you can visit Active Minds. The Trevor Project is a really great organization that deals with LGBTQ youth that are dealing with suicide, that are feeling suicidal. So it has a really great crisis line and just really great resources. Strength of Us, I think it's through NAMI. It's a social networking site where you can go and talk to other young adults that are dealing with what you're dealing with, and it's kind of like they have a little thing where you can kind of tweet to each other, or you can put up blogs, and it's a cool site. It doesn't know when I could put that last one in here. We'll take you to our website really quick. Maybe. Well, if you go to our website, we have a link for a whole bunch of resources. So once you go to our website, go to the resources link, and we have like resources, advocacy resources, young adult resources, all kinds of different resources. We also have our favorite books and movies about mental health. So you can see all of that on this page. See lots and lots and lots of resources and films and books. So, questions?
I'll answer this one. So this one is, I think, one that I can speak to a little bit about advice for a family member who has had a person in their family die by suicide. And there are support groups out there, and losing a family member to suicide is every grief is bad, but it's an extra tough grief to deal with because there's a lot of anger and guilt and all kinds of things. And there are people out there that really know how to support you. And one is the Carla Smith Foundation. We have some very dear friends that started this organization called the Carla Smith Foundation. And I know there's also local groups and people that are probably well versed in supporting. We talked to Mary about that as well. But online, the Carla Smith Foundation is a good organization. And they are so dedicated that they'll call someone on the phone and talk to them and help them find resources. So it takes a lot of time to get over that. But I also think that it's something that, like everything else, the more that you keep it inside and the more that you deal with the guilt, the harder it is to deal with it. So, yeah, I'm sorry for their loss, or your loss. Question, the hard question. What do you do if someone needs help but doesn't want it? They're not suicidal yet, as far as you know, and they don't want help. What do you do? And that is the toughest question that we get. And I think the honesty and sitting down and just saying to someone, but ultimately if you have an adult, that's part of this whole thing that happened when, Reagan said we can't institutionalize or put people in hospitals without their permission, and we can't just grab them up off the street. And I always wonder why we do that if somebody is sick with drugs and alcohol or a heart attack, but if it's a mental health condition. But honesty, talking about it, being there, staying there, telling people I'm here for you. I know you're not feeling well. I'm worried about you. I'm not going away. and then getting support for yourself if you're that person, that caretaker, that person that's trying to talk about it. So anything to add to that, Mary? Yeah, it's a tough one. Find someone to support you while you're supporting them, and know that sometimes you physically can't haul somebody in. Okay.
I have a really good one from someone that signed it anonymous. I don't know if you feel comfortable at some point coming up to me later when no one knows who it is. But I would like to talk to you personally. So if you signed it anonymous, at some point we'll just be around. We'll hang out for a little while. So when everyone leaves, we can talk.
And then someone handed in this amazing list of all these resources in NAMI, with the NAMI, the Portage County, the Stevens Point, family support groups. If that person is willing to say, I did that, that would be really cool, because then if people, yeah, right there. So if people have, want to talk to you, because this is a great group and I've already got your information, and I'll give this to you, Mary, as well.
I'm actually a facilitator.
Oh,
awesome. And I'm also teaching a third class.
All right. Perfect.
So she's the one to talk to.
Yes,
correct?
yes, so you are willing to speak. And that has been so helpful to so many families. People who have mental illnesses, finding other people, learning about their illness, and family members. And I should have said to that question about what do you do if that person doesn't want to get help, go see you and get in that family to family support group. You don't have to be a family member necessarily. You can be a friend, you can be whatever. And that is a place to find out really what to do and what your resources are. So.
Also, the person who signed anonymous, I think you would be a great person to talk to if they feel comfortable. I'll get your email or something, and if they come talk to me, I can give them your email if they feel comfortable talking to you.
And I'm not going to put you on the spot, but I have one question. I'm not really sure what the question is, but maybe if there's other questions, we'll just open it up, ask questions, and then maybe that person can pop that question in the middle of it. And if you've got questions, please feel free. Questions about anything we've talked about, any of the resources. Oh, when Linea was first hospitalized, she says to me, have you read the book? By the way, there's a great scene in the book. I'll have to give it to you. Jordan is legally blown.
She's recluded in that.
Yeah, yeah.
Really, really smart, but a sorority girl.
Yeah. So the first time that all this started, she said to me, I don't get it. I mean, she's very supportive, and she's like a mother, second mother, and she meant this from the heart, but she really meant this. She goes, I don't get it. She goes, why is Linea so sad? I just get mad. I mean, that's how she acts. And so when Linea was in the hospital, in the lockdown, Jordan came to visit her, and Jordan was like, okay, if I can get her out into the sun, she's going to feel better. Like, well, she can't go outside. She doesn't have privileges to go out yet. Well, that's ridiculous. She needs to go outside, be in the sun. I need to take her for coffee. I'll help her get better. It's like, Jordan, she can't. She can't do that. So the nurse comes over and tells Jordan, or Linea, she has to go to group. And Jordan's like, that nurse is so mean. I can't believe she's doing that. And I said, no, she has to go to group. I said, let's go outside. And Jordan, as we're walking out, was like, nurse is a bitch. We get outside, out of the unit, we get outside, and Jordan is just so mad, and she's like, they don't know what they're doing in there. They just need to let her out of there. This is ridiculous that she's locked in. And she said, and she goes, and that nurse is a bitch. And then I put my arm around her, and she broke into tears and started sobbing and saying, I'm so scared. I'm so scared for her. And this doctor walked around the corner, and he looked at Jordan, and he goes, kind of got it right there with that. Like, I know the nurse you're talking about. So the long answer is that's Jordan. Fiercely loves Linea, fiercely supports her, but she has never dealt with depression. She's dealt with being pissed off. So it's hard for her to understand that. So.
And if you have any questions you don't feel comfortable or any thoughts you don't feel comfortable sharing, you can just email us privately also on these emails which are available.
Any other questions or comments? You guys have been wonderful to stay here this long. afterwards or whatever, so thank you so much for your